With all the success you've had, do you still face, are you currently facing any fears, or are there fears about the horizon?
Man, I have to give you amazing props. You're such a curious person about the people that you talk to. I love it. I love it, man.
Thank you.
The answer is, thank you. Are you kidding me? I've been on a ton of podcasts and people just same questions.
Welcome to the Idea Climbing Radio Show. We're here today with Chris Brogan, New York Times bestselling author of 9 books, 10th on the way, of course, who's given over 1,000 speeches in 14 countries and counting so far. Thank you for making the time to be here, Chris. I appreciate it.
I can never say no to you. I'm so happy to be here climbing some ideas.
Sweet. Well, let's just get climbing then. I'd love to jump right in. One of your recent LinkedIn newsletters was talking about giving your idea handles. Before you explain that in more detail, where did that come from? What's the story there? How did you come up with it?
The whole idea, and that's kind of I put it up recently, but it's something I've been talking about since I think about 2006. So it's leftovers. But I will say that the reason is I've always thought this idea is better. A lot of times we try really hard to get people to kind of come around to our way of thinking and all that. I have a totally different view. I think if you make an idea make enough sense that someone else can take it and run with it, I think that's the best way to give value to an idea. Because once someone else says, this is my idea, then you've won, right? Like, I'm not in the getting credit for a cool idea department. I'm in the swaying people to follow my evil bidding. And so I want to make sure that they understand the idea and can run with it and take it on.
So if they're going to run with it and take it on, where's the line drawn as far as it's your idea, other people run with it? How do you build a brand for yourself if other people are running with the ideas, or how does that intersect?
You know who gets referenced a lot in the world? People with good ideas. So I think that if you have enough ideas that people, are willing to acknowledge where they got them from, then you get the credit that way. Again, it's not, I don't necessarily need someone to say my name in some interview for me to feel better about myself. But I can tell you that once you have people who are seeking interesting thoughts and seeking ways to influence their performance, and they get something from you, well, guess what else they do? They come back for more. So I'm looking for repeat customers. I'm looking for the sort of mental monthly recurring revenue of people's thoughts.
Well, we'll get back into more of the pinnacle, which is what you just mentioned, where you've shared a ton of ideas. Like I said, 9 books and counting. As far as somebody that wants to be a thought leader that's in the earlier stages, how did you do that? When you weren't the person a lot of people were seeking out or had a brand. How do you get started with doing that, with not overprotecting your ideas, but at the same time, letting them still be yours if other people are going to run with them a little bit? What did your early career look like?
So I started out in the land of blogging in 1998, way back when they called it journaling. I started doing a video thing in 2005 on YouTube. I started my first podcast in 2005. So I was out there making media in lots of forms and formats for a long time. The only thing I came horrifically late to compared to certain people, I'm 53, other people of my age who were sort of working in the era I was in, the only thing I didn't rush to sooner was newsletters. And blogs are kind of gone. It's really, you'd be really hard pressed to point out a blog you love all the time these days. But a lot of people are subscribed to XYZ newsletter. So every time I say blog by mistake, just put newsletter in your head. What I was doing way back then, and when I started really picking up people that wanted to pay attention to me, I was sharing my wins. I was sharing my failures. I was sharing my, I don't even know. And what do you guys think? And what came of this was people reacted to my humility. People reacted to the fact that I never had to look perfect all the time. I was very often the first person to tell you, I don't think I know what I'm talking about. And then other people would kind of jump in. So I guess if I were boiling that ocean for a new person trying to start at zero, I would say produce interesting information, learn brevity, come up with ideas that other people aren't saying. The one, if I had to slap someone's hand a little, Mark, I would say the one thing I see that always just drives me nuts is when someone else creates a new channel and immediately starts quoting other people's stuff It's like, I already know what Gary thinks. I already know what this other person thinks. I don't need another Mel Robbins. I've got the best one. Her name's Mel Robbins. Like, come up with something new and interesting by going out and trying ideas from places that other people aren't looking under the rocks. That might be better for all of us.
Go into a little bit more detail. You said it a couple times or a few times. Interesting content, interesting ideas. What makes content interesting?
To me, it's if it's actionable to somebody beyond, the person having the conversation, meaning like, I don't know how many times I've paid attention to someone who is like a renowned expert on something, wherein which what they feed is information I can't do anything with. Like, let me show you how to fine tune a rocket. It's interesting, but it's not like I finish that, piece of content and go, I can't wait to go figure out how to fine tune a rocket now. Like, it has to connect with me. So what I consider interesting, is there a story I haven't heard a certain way? Is there a turn of phrase I haven't heard a certain way? And is there anything actionable I can do with it? Because to me, you're either in the information or the entertainment business. But as you know, if we're not making entertaining information, we're in a pretty quiet sector of the universe, right?
Oh, I mean, without a doubt. And another thing with people getting started with whatever kind of content, we'll dig into that a little bit more, and creating handles. As far as, could you speak to imposter syndrome? Because I know I've had it years ago, and I know some people say, well, I'm too new to this. Why would people listen to me? Did you ever face imposter syndrome, and or what do you tell people who think that they're facing it?
Okay, so I have to sort of unpack a bunch of things really quick before I answer that question, because what I will say is, no, I don't have imposter syndrome. The reason I say I have to unpack a few things is, if you knew even a little bit about me, you'd be like, that's ridiculous. Because one, I suffer from clinical depression. That right there should be enough for me to feel like I should have imposter syndrome. Like, I have a bunch of chemicals that flood my brain and choose to help me believe things that aren't necessarily accurate. Number one. Number two, I'm not an expert in anything. I have zero expertise. I am an amateur in everything. So I should feel like an imposter. Number three, I have had the great blessing and pleasure, including today in this moment, to surround myself with some of the smartest people in the world. I am always the dumbest guy in the room, 100% of the time. So I would think I'm not all that in a bag of potato chips. However, I don't have imposter syndrome, because it's not about, am I smarter than the person I'm trying to give this information to? It's, is this going to be useful to someone else? Can you use this? That's all I think the whole time I create stuff is this something someone else can run with and do something with? And that way, it doesn't matter if I'm good or bad. I'll tell you one more sidebar, and then you can follow up. I've given over 1,000 speeches all over the world. You gave me that great intro. 100% of the time, right before I go on stage, anywhere on the earth, ladies and gentlemen, Chris Brogan, as I'm walking up those stairs, the voice in my head whooshes in and says, you're a failure, you're a fraud, you're terrible, you're no good at what you do. They're going to figure it out. This is the day. Today's the day you bomb. And I go, douche. And I started saying whatever my speech is going to be through that noise. I don't know why, don't know where it comes from. I'm generally not thinking those thoughts. Every speech I've ever given, that's the thought that hits my head. So if I listened to that voice in my head, you wouldn't know my name.
How do you get over the voice in your head? What do you do between walking up the stairs and getting on stage?
Try not to trip. And then when I finally get my feet both on the stage and I don't think I'm going to fall through any part of the stage, the very next thought I have is, thank you, voice in my head. Not sure what that's about, but thanks for telling me. And then I try to remember everything I said I was going to say in my speech. I walk right over it. There's a book called Self-Confidence by Dr. Matthew McKay. It's a very old book. It's very dry too. It's yucky, but I read it. It was like a medicine. I had to take it. And in it, he says there's a voice inside of all of us called the inner critic. And the inner critic exists, as best as anyone can tell, it exists to do one thing: protect us from things it worries that we're going to feel bad about later. The thing is, the inner critic has no dashboard. It has no measurement. It has no real sense of the outside world. So all it does is say, you failed a few times in your past. I just don't want you to have to feel that again. And so it just presumes everything you're going to do is failure. And the best anyone's come up with for how to how to work with that voice is just to thank it. You can't be mean. You can't be a jerk about it. You just got to be like, thanks, inner critic. Appreciate that feedback. And then you just keep going.
Well, you mentioned something that's near and dear to me. I love to be the dumbest guy in the room, and I have for a long time. What advice do you have for the people who say, okay, that makes sense. I do want to surround myself with smarter people, whether it's holding conversations with them, presenting yourself in person or virtually. As far as being the dumbest guy in the room, what advice do you have for people that say, I want to do that too, but I don't want to just be dumb alone in a corner?
Be as your little audio clip, your video clip there said, if you're curious, people love a curious person. And this is so important. If you can ask great questions, which is a practice thing, you have to practice. Mm-hmm. I just watched, let's say a few hundred hours of interviews with both Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, who's passed away, about investing in stuff. Berkshire Hathaway, one of the biggest, highest valued companies in the whole wide world, hundreds of billions of dollars of value, the best investor in the history of humanity. And what I watch lately are a mix of interviews. Some of the interviews are from incredible interviewers like David Rubenstein, who is head of Carlyle Group and a great interviewer. And then I watch a bunch of really nice, well-meaning college people ask questions. And I'm like, that's what you want to ask one of the smartest investing minds in the world. That was your question. And for the dumbest guy in the room, if you have a pretty good, useful question, it doesn't have to be a brilliant question, has to be a question that lets the guest do their best work. That's how you get invited to more places. Mark, I will tell you, people think I am smart because they remember a great conversation with me. All they did is tell me all the things they think.
Dissect that a little more. What makes a great question? This is awesome.
A great question. So first off, I really, and I'm not saying this because I'm a guest on your show.
Yeah.
I really like how you ask questions. I think you do a fine job of it. I think you do a very powerful thing of listening in the moment. One of my favorite interviews to talk about is one time this really lovely guy from, I think, Sri Lanka. He asked me questions. He had prepared his questions and he was like, what would you say are the traits that you need to run the kind of small businesses that you like to work with? I gave my answer. Every single next thing he would say is, okay. And then he would go to his next question. He just 100% just caught the answers like he was a database filling up. And, it's fine. It was, I'm sure, one of his early interviews in his life, and maybe he's a great interviewer now. But I always think about that because to me, what makes a great question is, don't let the guest talk for 300 hours. I feel like my answers are too long, so I'll get shorter. But also give them something to spring off of. One of my least favorite questions ever in interviews, tell me how you got started. It's the least fun question to answer. Always start in the middle of the action, which is what you did. I saw this post you wrote. Why were you even thinking about that? Don't start at the beginning. Nothing starts at the beginning. Star Wars does not start at the history of Star Wars. It starts at episode 4. There's a reason.
So how do you, same situation, dumbest guy in the room. Okay, now he or she is armed with what makes a great question. How do you start conversations with people, especially when you're getting going? If it's going to lead to interview, whether it's just private mentoring conversation or a public YouTube interview, how do you start conversations with people when it's like, wow, they're such a higher level than I am? What does a start of a good conversation look like?
Also known as let Chris have the biggest name drop he could possibly do. I interviewed Sir Richard Branson. I convinced him through Success Magazine. There's no way I could have pulled Richard on my own. Like, that's not going to happen. But I got Success Magazine to say, Chris, do you want to interview Richard for our magazine? And I was like, well, yes, I do. And they said, we'll make it the cover. I said, even better. And there's a backstory to that that's hilarious. But I get Richard on his first ever Skype call. This is before Zoom. And he's never done Skype. And he is visually nervous because he doesn't know me. I'm a complete unknown. He knows Success Magazine. I never send prep questions because that's a horrific idea. So I'm like, oh no, I have to make my business idol comfortable before I know he's going to open up to some questions. And so I said, Sir Richard, I've read every single book you've ever written. I said, I'm a massive fan of Business Stripped Bare. I could quote page numbers to you, but only in the British Waterstones paperback version, because that's the only version I have, because I happened to be in the UK when I got it. I said, I know you have a new book that I have not read coming out about fitness and health. You're a ridiculously busy person. I can't even begin to imagine what you do for health, given 400 businesses worth of working. How in the world can you possibly find time to do anything with fitness? Easy question for him to answer. I basically said, what's that thing you do in your day? He immediately relaxed. He immediately knew that I wasn't going to make him feel bad. I was going to couch it. That he knew I was a true believer. Like you don't have to do a mountain of prep to make someone feel comfortable with you. But if you do even a modicum of prep, then the other person feels like I am willing to have this conversation.
Okay, I have to ask because you mentioned it. What's the funny backstory with Branson?
It's with Success Magazine. One day, so I was writing for Success very, very back of the book. Like I was like page 65 in the book or something. Success Magazine calls me out of the blue. The publisher at the time of it, who I'm not going to remember her name, Susan something, and says, do you know anything about the Kardashians? And I said, no. And she goes, oh, because I'm working on this article about it. Well, the girl I was with at the time knew everything about it, watched the show all the time, knew deep, immense amounts of detail. So I said, my girlfriend knows. She goes, yeah, sure. Can I talk to her? I'm like, yep. So I hand the phone over and they talk for like 26 minutes. They hang up. The same woman calls me back and says, can you co-write the cover article about the Kardashians? We're on a really tight deadline. I will pay you the most money I've ever received on an article. And I said, yes. And Mark, I am the least negotiating guy in the history of time. This is the most money I've ever been offered for an article, 5 times what I normally would get. And I don't know what happened. I said, it was like I went into a fugue state, my tongue rolled back. I went, yes. And I would like to interview Richard Branson for your magazine. Can you help me set that up? And can I figure out a way to do that interview? And she goes, if you land this with me, you could do anything. And I said, just say yes. She goes, yes. I did it, handed. I wrote a huge article all about the Kardashians, of which I knew nothing, and got to talk to Branson.
So what other ways, I love that you made him feel comfortable, especially at that level. I would imagine, I'll put it on me, that would have made me uncomfortable thinking, oh my God, I can see he's nervous. If he's nervous, I should be. As far as in an interview format, and again, it could be the one-on-one if someone's just getting started for a mentoring conversation. Can you explain a few more ways to get someone else comfortable? Because I know that's one of the biggest compliments an interviewer can get is I just felt comfortable. How do you get people comfortable during an interview?
I think there's a few things. I run a weekly video show in which the first few minutes backstage, one of the things I run through a little process. One of the things they say all the time is it's really important you understand that this show is about you and not about me. If I mess something up, you should and must correct me. Like if I say, hey, tell me about your background as a helicopter pilot, and you're like, I don't know what he's talking about, like correct me. Second, you can do 5 to 10 minutes of pre-work to know 3.5 facts about a person. And you can show even in the pre-call, really fast, hey, I know this stuff without name dropping that you know it. Like, it's not, when I wish people happy birthday because LinkedIn told me it was their birthday, I never say LinkedIn told me it was your birthday. I just wish them happy birthday. So if you do a little of that, the third thing, one of the other things I say in my pre-call is, clearly, I'm not a gotcha journalist. There is nothing bad or negative here. These are all easy softball questions. I just want to get some cool things out. The whole concept of my show is success in, insights from unusual places. So that's what I'm going for. I want to talk to weirdos who do different things that other people don't. And I'm excited that we're going to get a chance to talk to you. You're the absolute master of your domain. That's why you're here. But you don't have to know everything. You just, if you don't know, or if I ask you a question you don't even know how to even vaguely respond to, just say, I don't know much about that. And that's all we're going to do. We're just going to go right to the next question. So I try to I walk through their mindset and I think, what's all the things I would be thinking if I were going to be a guest on someone's show? And then I try to fix or solve for that ahead of the interview.
So with everyone that you've interviewed, we're getting a little bit closer to giving your idea handles. Yeah. How did sharing other people's ideas help your career early on? I mean, Success Magazine and Richard Branson goes without saying. As far as other ones, maybe back in the blogosphere, whatever it was, how did sharing other people's ideas help to build your brand, if it did at all?
That's an interesting question, because I would say for the first many years, I mostly wrote about my ideas and myself. I just endlessly wrote about myself, because the thing we do a lot, the thing we could stand to not do as much, is a lot of times in those moments, what we do is we go out and we talk about the same person everyone's talking about. There needs never be, and I say this with all respect and friendship and love. I love Gary Vaynerchuk. We're friendly. I would say we're friends, but it wasn't like we've had a bowl of cereal together lately. But I would say that I've known him since 2005. I don't need another article from me or anybody I know about Gary. Let the world at large have him. It's fine. So go after people that nobody knows. Go after like a really cool person making cured meat or like beef jerky or something, and talk to them about their cool thing. I talked to someone who we talked to two different First Nation Native American rappers who were in their raps, they used their native tongue as well as English mixed and matched. And I thought that was a really neat project. So if you're going to bother sharing other people's ideas, go find interesting people's ideas. I talked to two different types of dominatrix. One, the old-fashioned ones you think of when you hear that name, slaps, whips, chains. The other one, a financial dominatrix who just takes money from people, and that's the interaction. Not a single other thing besides give me $2,000 and feel bad. And they go, I do, and whatever. I thought, this is, how can I get a job like this? So, don't go after the same old faces. Go after some people who need the spotlight, who deserve the spotlight. Find interesting up and comers. Talk to the second grade teacher and get those ideas to look interesting. That's how you can really, boost your brand as somebody doing cool stuff.
So what did you do? I mean, you go out, you find these cool people somehow. If you want to share how it could just be as simple as, well, whatever was back in the day, but Google, Yahoo, whatever it might be. When you find them, how do you approach them in the right manner to keep their attention? Because even if they're doing something, they're not famous, but it's interesting, they probably have a lot of people approaching them. When you find someone, how do you go about approaching them?
I name drop like a son
Chris
of
Brogan with a bigger name.
I name drop so bad. I'm like, hey, do you want to be on the same show Sir Mix-a-Lot has been on? Do you want to be the same kind of person who, the former chairman of Yum Brands and also the head of Johnsonville has been on? I try to find at this point, I've interviewed so many people. I try to find one that's, in their vertical in some way. And that's one way. If you're starting out and you don't have that person, just say the kinds of shows I've done are, and you talk about the people that you thought were cool. Look, when I said the guests I just said to you, I'm sure you were like, oh, that sounds kind of cool, right? Like you didn't have to know who those people were. You were like, oh, I wonder what they talked about. Like, that's what we all want in life. We all want just kind of interesting things that we think will be fun.
Well, now that you have ideas that other people can carry forward and kind of, like you mentioned with handles, make their own, could you explain more about that? How do you give someone handles and not just give away the idea and poof, it disappears from you and it's theirs?
That's the trick of it. I give the idea away and make it theirs. What this is kind of like, they always say a Jedi mind trick, this is not the droids you're looking for. I think of this more like a Sith mind trick. I want that person to think this was their idea all along. I do my best to inculcate someone with an idea and then tell them, I cannot believe what you just came up with. That is insane.
Oh,
wow. How do we even do more of that? Mark, it is embarrassing how that works. People just go, oh, hey, yeah, thanks. And they run with it if it's a good enough and interesting idea. Now, the white hat hope and version of this is that I think I never need credit for any of my ideas. When I was starting out, I think I used to get a little fussy about that. And a few times there's been people have lifted chunks of my intellectual property, like from a book I wrote, and put it in their book. That's not okay. However, what are a lot of the ideas we all have? We all have stupid ideas. Some other idiot also had. Like, so many of these ideas aren't like super amazing. And the way you know that is every time you think you've come up with the coolest domain in the world, go to GoDaddy and immediately find out that everyone else already bought that domain 5 years ago. So truly none of our ideas are especially unique. We just have a different take on them or something. If it's especially like a play on words or something, I'll tell you a weird secret pet peeve of mine. When humans say something like, I like to call this, and then the next phrase out of their mouth is a phrase everyone calls, Like I like to call this talking behind people's backs. No, everyone calls it that. That's not you like to call it. That's how it's called, And I think, Mark, that we put a lot of emphasis on the notion of who came up with an idea. And every now and again, you have to it turns out Benjamin Franklin came up with everything, if you trust Google.
Of course.
It's so rarely important. There was a quote I found. There's this really interesting fiction book I'm reading right now called Babel, and I will not get into it. It's way too many words. But the very first quote on the very first page of the book was something about how languages and empires rise and fall in conjunction with each other, meaning whole swaths of words and language vanish when an empire comes down. The British Empire, Roman Empire, Dutch Empire. There's all this like vernacular and phrases and words and understandings and context that's long gone. And I was like, that is fascinating. And it took me like whole 2 hours plus to find the actual person who said the thing. And so many other people were credited with it, including that author who just wrote the book like a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what mattered? By the time I got to the end of it, you know what mattered? None of that mattered. I only remember the quote. I don't remember who created it, and it doesn't matter because it's just a kind of interesting quote. I think that's what you have to hope with your ideas. You have to hope that your idea persists long after they forget that you're the one who came up with it.
So how does sharing ideas, or I mean, maybe it's, tell me if I'm using too strong a language, giving away ideas, how does that help you in the long run? Like to give it away and let someone run with it?
I can cook some pretty delicious food. And if you come over to my house and you eat and we share some time together, you go, man, that was a good meal. And then next time you're kind of hungry for the particular thing I put together, you're like, man, Brogan made a good blah, blah, blah. Let's come over there and have some of that. That's with ideas. If I have an idea and it really steams up your brain and you're like, oh my gosh, I totally love that idea. Then you go seeking that person's ideas more. I mean, think about it anytime you've ever found like a band you love or an album you loved or a movie where you just couldn't get enough of the concept of the movie. So you go, what was the book behind this? Right? Like we humans love, bathing in something that we find, pleasurable. If we love something, we go chase more of it. And so as a peddler of ideas, as somebody who sells ideas, if I can give you an abundance of them, then it's almost like that Seth Godin quote about like, books are just the souvenir of the cool concert. I desperately want you to go, oh man, I need some more Brogan. And then maybe I'll make some dollars off it, or maybe I'll make some opportunity off it. If you accidentally make the mistake of trying to capitalize more on the idea than on making that the seed of even further bounties, you run the risk of trying to sell seeds instead of selling fruit.
Well, we're touching on it already. As far as ideas go, sharing them, other people running with yours, you running with other people's. Can you give some tips to people? How do you brand, in light of what we've been talking about? Maybe it's reiterating it, maybe it's something different. How do you brand yourself as a thought leader by running with and also sharing ideas? How do you become the thought leader?
I am terrified if this indirectly or directly insults you. I don't like people who try to be thought leaders. I think it's the same as people who want to be gurus and many other things. I think that if you have to walk around telling people you're a thought leader, you're doing it wrong. So like if like, I don't know, maybe that's the whole concept of, your show. And I've just totally poked a thumb in it, but
no, not at all.
Okay, good. I think I've never once met a thought leader that I've gone, no, that's a thought leader. I've met people that tell me they're thought leaders, and if I probe them 5 questions in, I'm suddenly going, oh, so that was it, huh? And the people I find are thought leaders are people who are like, they're like snow cone machines or whatever. They're like cotton candy at a carnival. You just see ideas flying out of them all the time, and they're just like a beehive of ideas. And there are people that I go to frequently and often that I'm just like, this person's going to have what I need. And there's people's books when they come out that every book they come out, I want to read it because I know they have some cool perspective on things. I love Ryan Holiday books. I'm not a stoic philosopher guy. I just like how Ryan writes. So I'll read anything that guy writes. If he wrote a book called I Bought a Store and here's my cool book about my bookstore, I'd read it. I think that instead of trying to be a thought leader, I think you're on the right path by saying, if I connect the smart people to the other smart people and they remember that I was there at that thing, then that's good enough. I thrive in a room when there's other people who know that I had something to do with two of them being in the room.
How do you do that without bragging, or is it just a humble brag and that's the end of the story?
It has been I wanted to make a joke, but I have a friend who makes
I'm open.
I have a friend who makes fun of me all the time that all my stories have a name drop in them. I've had a very blessed life and career in which I've, you and I have been in the same room with JJ French from Twisted Sister. So I could say, JJ French told me this whole story about no one ever says party like a fry cook. And, but I could tell that story first person because I was there. I could have touched his elbow while he was talking, which would have been awkward. Right. So humble bragging, I try my hardest not to, but I also name drop like a son of a. I don't think it's the right way. I think the right way is if everyone else in the room, if you've benefited even two people in the room and they know that, I think the real wizardry happens when they can say, without even saying it out loud, I know Brogan is why I'm here, and I can be thankful for that. The other thing I used to get offered tons and tons and tons of keynote speeches. Those days are long gone, more than a decade gone. But I used to get offered so many that I could hand them off to so many other people. If you make someone other than yourself some money, I will tell you, you will always be invited to everything if you make other people money. So I have many times handed things I couldn't do to other people and made other people a few $100,000 in the process. I have a name drop. My first big speech that I got, my first huge dollar keynote speech, Guy Kawasaki gave it to me. Guy Kawasaki, it was passing me in the hallway at South by Southwest, and he said something about, hey, did you get that email? And I was like, what email? And I was kind of being a jerk. And he goes, the one where I made you a lot of money. And he did. He made me $20,000. And that was just nuts that Guy Kawasaki said, you know who you should get? Brogan. And then he did it to me years later because he knew I was such a Google Plus idiot that he brought me to Google headquarters for this Motorola thing back when Google bought Moto for some dumb reason. And then I was there in this room full of people that I couldn't possibly have had access to. Guy did that. You know who I love till he's dead? Guy Kawasaki. So that's it. Like, that's the goal. That's the hope, is that, you've got enough people that you have influenced in some way without ever having to mention that you did it, that you will forever be invited to those parties.
Well, that's an awesome idea to a follow-up question. I'd love to hear more ideas. How else can you give your idea handles? When should you give your idea handles? What are some more tips in that arena? Because I love where this is going.
I think that the more times you can make it clear enough that someone else can execute it, that you make it simple and bite-sized enough that they can follow it. There's a lot of people who complain about TikTok and the like. I don't use the service. I use old man TikTok, which is YouTube Shorts, which is like, if it makes the divide over to YouTube Shorts, then I might see it. Some other people do Reels on Instagram, which is also just another TikTok. I think that as people have kind of complained and poo-pooed the super ultra short form, the 30-second to 60-second spot, I think it's amazing. Because I think if you could actually put enough value into a 30 to 60-second moment, audio or visual, that people go, oh, I need me some of that. Yeah, I think that's a handled idea. I think that's an idea that someone can run with. So try to make it so that you don't have to read a 300-page book. U.S. Department of Labor and Statistics says that and this is a 10-year-old fact, the average human, at least in America, reads no more than 19 minutes a day, including text messages and emails. 19 minutes a day. Oh. I'm a book author. You're a book author. You know what factoid we don't want to spread around? That one. And yet it's true. You know who reads books? Book readers. You know who doesn't? The other 7.75 billion people on the earth.
Well, with the idea of handles also, I'd love to know what's the next best thing? Let's say you can't make somebody money at any stage of your career, or let me rephrase this. an opportunity presents itself to make a great connection, but you can't make the money. What's the next best thing to that?
The next best thing to making money is making relationships, because those pay multiple times. So if you can make a connection with someone, here's another name drop. Chairman of Johnsonville is on my podcast. Should not be. Like, there's no reason that guy should be there. This young lady named Colette, who is in Boston, who runs Colette's Cookies. She couldn't get a job. She has Down syndrome, and nobody wanted to give her a job. So her dad said, you know what we could do? Let's just open our own business. And everyone was like, yeah, that's kind of cool. I put those two on the same show. They talked after the show. They now have a friendship, a business relationship, and everything. You know who remembers that? Maybe Colette. You know who definitely does? Johnsonville guy. That's a real win, right? Like, because next time I mention him, I message him and I go, hey, I got this cool idea. What do you think? He's going to go, that's a really nice guy. He helped me help that young lady out. I feel really good that I helped that young lady. If you can be at the elbow of every deal without needing something for yourself, you get invited to all the rooms. That Hamilton quote, Mark, I want to be in the room where it happened. You know how you get there?
Yeah.
Either great accomplishments, or you're the person who glues together people who accomplish great things.
So tell me a little bit more about that. How do you make a good introduction? What qualifies a good introduction?
What qualifies a good okay. I have a lot of opinions on this. In the email sending version of this first, if people have listened to nothing on idea climbing besides this is the only thing I want them to take away. In an email situation, email the person individually both ways. Someone says, hey, I like talking to Brogan on that show. That was impressive, Mark. Can you give me an introduction to Mark? And I go, yeah, hang on. And I email you and I say, hey, this person just reached out of the blue. They really want to meet you. They were thrilled by the way you interviewed me. Are you open to that introduction? I wait for you to say yes or no. I say back to the person, cool, here's the intro, let's go. Never, 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 never blind intro anybody. 100% of the time, for me, 100% of the time, I'm never going to be excited about this unless it's like, hey, did you want to meet Nikki Sixx from Motley Crue? And I'd be like, sure, that sounds kind of cool. You know, like if it's the coolest person in the world, I'll probably forgive your sin. If it's just the average schmoes like us, I'm not forgiving you. I'm going to think bad thoughts about you until you are in the ground.
We've covered a lot of ground in a short period of time. If you were to tell two questions, it's usually one, but let's go with two. Someone that wants someone to give their idea handles to give it away. If you were to say, you know what, just get started here and do this one thing with your idea to be able to give it away, what would you tell them to do?
Make it brief and easily consumable. There you go, done.
Brief and easily consumable makes perfect sense. How about the other side? Someone who wants to find people with ideas that they can take the handles of and run with them. What would you tell them?
Start consuming from spots that aren't the mainstream. Start looking for weird places. Start subscribing to newsletters about things you have no business subscribing to, and start reading from like carbon material strength tensile journals and things like that. Janelle Tang, next big Tang. Go find that and you'll love it. You'll be like, I don't know what anything this woman's saying. And then after a while you will, and then you're going to be amazing.
This has been great. If people want to find you online, where's the best place to go?
ideaclimbingradio.com. I think that's my URL.
Yes.
Just go there. Yeah. I'm chrisbrogan.com, or just send an email, chris@chrisbrogan.com. If you go to chrisbrogan.com and click the newsletter link, that's the best thing I do. Every Sunday, when Mark said, hey, I got a new show, you want to come on it? I was like, yep, he did that off my newsletter link. So I write back to everybody who writes me.
Thank you again. I appreciate the time, Chris.
Always. Thank you for having me here.
And